welcome everyone to the kickoff event for One Book, One Boulder, Read, Engage, Grow. My name is Celine, Programs, Events, and Outreach Specialist at the Boulder Public Library, and we are so excited to host tonight's event. Our keynote speaker this evening is the Poet Laureate of Aurora, Colorado, Assétou Xango, and we are delighted to have them join us in an engaging evening of poetry and dialogue. We will also hear from the Boulder Public Library and Arts Director, David Farnan, as well as the Director of Community Engagement and Strategic Partnerships for the Boulder Library Foundation, Patrice Madurai. The Boulder Library Foundation has provided generous support to make One Book, One Boulder possible, and we thank them for their contribution to tonight's event. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping notes to ensure the success of this event. All of our online events are an extension of library services. Library conduct and policies apply in our online space. We have also compiled 3 guidelines for this event and other One Book, One Boulder events. Number 1, listen to and amplify marginalized voices. If you choose to self-identify as a BIPOC person, Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, we invite you to put an asterisk before your questions and comments so we can be sure to give marginalized voices a chance to speak and be heard. Number 2, give space and give grace. To the best of your ability, ask questions that will lead to your own greater understanding while also making sure to leave space for others to speak, share, and understand. Ask if you are stereotyping, underestimating, or insulting a fellow community member. When listening, give others grace. We all stumble and make mistakes as we grow. And number 3, no racist statements or slurs will be tolerated. Our first guest this evening is David Farnan, the Boulder Public Library and Arts Director, who would like to say a few words. Your turn, David. Oh, shit. David, you're muted.
Sorry. I'm in good company muting, or bad company. Good evening, and welcome to the kickoff of One Boulder, One Book, One Boulder. So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. My name is David Farnan, and I'm the Library and Arts Director for the City of Boulder. I want to start off by acknowledging my privilege. As a white person, I am able to ignore racism or minimize the impact of racism on my life. As a librarian, I have always understood myself through the books that I have read. And while my reading habits have changed over my life, I have never surrendered the idea that books are formative. They make us think. They provide nuance. They challenge us. I know Ijeoma's book was like that for me. The library and the Library Foundation first decided to read Ijeoma Oluo's book, So You Want to Talk About Race, before the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. We decided to do so out of a sincere commitment and belief that our community needed to have a conversation about racism in our society and in our community. A One Book program seeks to bring the community together through the reading and discussion of a single book. It is an attempt to create a shared experience, an aid to engaging our community in conversations about a topic that is on people's minds. The purpose of this program is to promote dialogue around racial equity within our community. The library and the Library Foundation believe strongly in being a platform for community dialogue. Racism is not going to go away because we read this book. After 400 plus years of a society built on systemic racism, it is difficult to imagine what kind of impact reading a book will have at all. But as we all know, the conversation on our community has already begun. And we will not make change unless we commit to actions. We need to amplify Black voices and people of color's voices in our community. We need to begin to unpack our own whiteness and our own privilege and not expect it to be something we can blithely look away from. It is not lost on me that tomorrow is the funeral of John Lewis, who fought his whole life for civil rights. It is particularly poignant that in his autobiography, Walking with the Wind, Lewis describes how as a child he longed to go to the Troy Public Library, but wasn't allowed to because it was for whites only. Even as an 8-year-old child, I could see there was something terribly wrong about that, Lewis wrote. Lewis would eventually apply for a library card there when he was a teenager. taking some of his brothers and sisters along with him, fully knowing he would be refused. In his book, he considers this his first official act of resistance to racial injustice. I hope that you enjoy One Book, One Boulder. I hope that you will read along with us as we make our way through So You Want to Talk About Race. We need to begin this long overdue dialogue. We need to begin it again. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Celine and Patrice Mataride. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, David. Our next guest this evening is Patrice Mataride from the Boulder Library Foundation, whose generous support has made this and many other events possible. Up to you, Patrice.
Thanks, Celine, and good evening. It's lovely that despite the health pandemic, our new normal still allows us to gather as one Boulder, even if it's virtually. Since its inception in 1974, the Boulder Library Foundation has been bringing the greater Boulder community together to ensure that our library can continue to develop impactful and life-changing programs. The Boulder Library Foundation is proud to fund 90% of the library's programs, and together with the Boulder Public Library, we are delighted to present this year's inaugural One Book, One Boulder. On a personal note, as a South African who was born at the tail end of apartheid, fractured race relations has in many ways defined the environment in which I grew up. As a young woman of color, I am proud to say that I am a product of a country that has sought reconciliation by having open and honest conversations about the difficulties we have had to overcome and the challenges that still lay ahead. Yes, there is still a long way to go, but we're a few steps closer to racial freedom because of education and active engagement, which has inspired growth. Have I been a victim of racial bias and prejudice? Yes, both in South Africa and here in the US. Real reform of our institutions and our mindsets begs a global conversation. So how apt is it that our incredible programs team has created a space for us, right here in Boulder, to tackle this topic head on? Earlier this year, when the title was confirmed, there was no real way of knowing just how different our world would look or how vital this program would be. At this very moment, there is a community of people in our society that are tired and frustrated of experiencing undue hardship and suffering, all because of the color of their skin. At the Boulder Library Foundation, we believe that Black lives matter, and until they matter equally in our communities and our country, we need to focus on this. As you read and unpack So You Want to Talk About Race, it is our hope that you will do so with open minds and an engaged spirit. We invite you to participate fully in the programming over the next 3 months and encourage you to challenge your thinking. One Book, One Boulder is a tiny step towards tackling the issue of race and equality in our country, and it is our sincere hope that the conversation shared will be the conduit that leads to many moments of growth and progress. A program of this nature would never have been possible without the help and support of our donors. So I just want to thank our donors for their incredible kindness and generosity. If you'd like to learn more about the foundation, you'll find out more information on our website. This evening marks the beginning of what is set to be a truly transformational experience. So all that's left for me to say is, let's talk about race. Thanks, Celine.
Thank you so much, Patrice. We really appreciate that. And again, the boulderlibraryfoundation.org website is displayed below. And without further ado, we are so excited, and I hope you all join me in a warm virtual welcome for our keynote speaker this evening, Assétou Xango. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Celine, and thank you, Boulder Library Foundation and the City of Boulder, for having me on, and more importantly, having these conversations. I want to invite all of us right now to really move into our body. We live in a culture that's very intellectual. We're very up here. We're very neck up. And we tend to want to intellectualize things. And there, of course, there's space for intellection and rationalization. However, what's missing in the conversations around race and systemic oppression in general is the ability to feel into our bodies and see how difficult the tension that we're holding is. So I invite you to feel your toes, whether they're in your socks and shoes or they're in your flip-flops or they're on the floor, wherever they are, just kind of wiggle them around. Notice that they're there. And then I want you to practice feeling them from the inside out. So see if you can feel the space within your toes, on the inside of your body. And once you have that, and even if it's small, even if it's just a little bit, you can kind of feel that your toes are there from the inside out. I want you to ask that feeling to grow. Say grow 10 times, and it can grow up your foot. And then notice the spaciousness up your leg. And just notice that grow up your body. And let it go slowly. And if you feel like you're losing it, you can kind of come back and ask it to grow again. And notice the sensations that are happening in your toes, in your legs, in your hips, in your torso, in your chest, in your throat, you know. And as the thoughts kind of jump around, just notice them too. They're part of the experience as well. But the reason that I want to draw your attention to the sensations in your body is because, you know, we talk a lot about mindfulness and we talk about presence, and those are all like nice buzzwords. But how do we get there? How do we get into presence? Do we have to go into a meditative state all the time? Like, how do we get there? And what I found is that the sensations in our body are actually, for me, the easiest way to hop into the present moment. Because you can't feel a sensation in the past. You can't feel a sensation in the future. You can only feel a sensation right now. So without adding any judgment to the sensations in your body, I invite you to just notice them. Just notice the sensation in your body. Now, why is this important? It's important because when we have difficult conversations, the tendency is to either get in our head and get intellectual, which stops us from feeling what's going on. That usually enables us to shut down without knowing it, right? And then we go into defensive mode, and then we're not hearing what is being said, and we're not engaging in a very human, connecting way. And also, all of that it's still getting stuck in our body. It's still happening in our bodies, but because we're not there, we're not present to it, we're not able to process it. And the other thing that happens is we don't know what we need. We don't know when we need to step away. We don't know when we need a drink of water. We don't know when we need to use the restroom, or just be like, okay, let me take a deep breath because this is getting really tense for me. And therefore, we're unable to really hold the tension and the difficulties of these conversations. And that's where a lot of folks start to move out of these conversations. And we start to find out that we're not getting to the core of it. We're maybe talking a little bit, and then we get overwhelmed, and that's the end of the conversation. So I really appreciate Boulder Library for making these series of events happen so that we can really practice that. So throughout the series of events, I encourage you, this is only the kickoff event, it's only the beginning. I encourage you to attend as many of these events as possible. We're going to be talking about how to do that at the end of this talk. But for right now, I just want you to remember to stay in your body. Because there's this beautiful notion of, you know, the concentric circles, and I'm not sure where it comes from, but the idea is that, you know, there's the middle one, that's your comfort zone. That's where you talk about the stuff that you talk to the people who you talk to the people who already agree with you, you have your comfort zone. Everybody has that. Everybody loves it there. I love it there. I stay there as much as I can, to be honest with you. But growth only happens when we push ourselves a little bit further, right? When we push ourselves to have the conversation that we don't normally have, that we don't know a lot about, with people that we don't maybe necessarily agree with, right? And then there's the third outer circle, that's the red zone. And that's when it's too far and we've shut down and we're overwhelmed and we're not in our body, and our system just says, oh, enough, I'm done, right? So I want you to be in that second circle, where you're growing, where you're listening, where you're learning. And if you start to feel yourself tilt in either direction, like you're tilting out or you're tilting too far over, just make sure to take care of yourself. Since you have that connection now, you know how to find that sensation. And I might just say throughout this talk, I might just say, go into your toes just to remind you to connect. And you know what your body is doing, and you can know, okay, I need to pause. That's the beauty of a virtual space. I will never know if you have to go take a seat down. But also make sure that you're not using that as an excuse to hop out just because it gets a little uncomfortable, right? So make sure you're in that growth circle. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to kick it off with a poem. I am a poet. That is my main source of communication. And then I'm going to lay a couple of ground rules, and then I'm going to do a slideshow. While I'm doing the slideshow, or even if you have questions during the poem, I encourage you to join the conversation. This is meant to be a conversation. I'm a spoken word poet. I do not do well with like entertaining. That's not where this tradition comes from. Spoken word comes from the griots of West Africa and what is now known as Mali. And these griots, these storytellers were all about bringing the community together, which is what Boulder Library is doing right now, right? Bringing the community together and saying, let's have a conversation. So when I get up to do my poems, when I get up to have a speech, I am not interested in appearing to be the smartest person or the expert in the room. I am here to facilitate a discussion. So as you're listening to me talk, if there's any insights that you have, any questions that you have, any thoughts you want to work out, you know, abiding the guide rules that we laid out in the beginning, I encourage you to be willing to be wrong. I encourage you to be willing to look silly and just ask and speak your mind. I really, really want us to be able to connect as a community. So please make sure that you are as active as possible in the comments. If you are a BIPOC, if you are a Black or Indigenous person of color, make sure you're putting an asterisk next to your comment so that we know to amplify that voice. So I will be receiving the questions and I will be answering those questions as we go, because the last thing I want to do is sit up here and pretend like I have all of this thing to say and y'all are just like not even interested in it. I want to have a conversation. I want to talk to you about some stuff. So please make sure you're engaging. Please make sure you're asking questions. Please make sure you're commenting and voicing your opinion. Okay, great. So here's my poem. Give your daughters difficult names. Names that command the full use of the tongue. My name makes you want to tell me the truth. My name does not allow me to trust anyone who cannot pronounce it right. Washan Shere. Many of my role models, contemporaries, but especially ancestors, have a name that brings the tongue to worship. Names that feel like ritual in your mouth. I don't want a name said without pause, muttered, without intention. I am through with names that leave me unmoved. Names that leave the speaker's mouth unscathed. I want a name like fire, like rebellion, like my hand gripping masses whip. No, I want a name from before the shifts. A name Officer Wilson might choke on. I want a name that catches you in the throat if you say it wrong. And if you're afraid to say it wrong, then I guess you should be. I want a name only the brave can say. A name that only fits right in the mouth of those who love me right, because only the brave can love me right. Assétou Xango is the name you take when you are tired of bearing your jewels under thick layers of soot and self-doubt. Assétou the light, Xango the pickaxe, so that people must mine your soul just to get your attention. If you have to ask why I changed my name, it is already too far beyond your comprehension. Call me callous, but with a name like Xango, I cannot afford to tread lightly. You go hard or you go home, and I am centuries and ships away from any semblance of a homeland. I'm a thief's poor bookkeeping skills away from any source of ancestry. I am blindly collecting the shattered pieces of a continent much larger than my comprehension. I hate explaining my name to people. Their eyes peering over my journal, looking for a history they can rewrite. Ask me what my name means. What the fuck does your name mean, Jackie? Not every word needs an English equivalent in order to have significance. I am done folding myself up to fit your stereotype, your Black friend, your African queen meme, your desire to learn the rhetoric of solidarity without the practice. I am trying to build a country, a continent, a home, body is a safeless place when you do not know its name. Assétou is what it sounds like when you are trying to bend syllables into a home with shaky shutters, and when whistling through your empty, I feel empty, motherless. There is no home in a body, no safety in a name. A name, it's honestly just a name. No, that's not quite right. A name is honestly just a ritual. And mine still sounds like reverence. Thank you. I hear your applause, I promise. Okay, wonderful. So I'm gonna flip over to this slideshow that I have for you. So what we're talking about today is really intersectionality. So you might have already been able to tell I'm really about integration, right? When I recognize that medicine is the thing that we're lacking. Medicine is the thing that we're out of balance with. So for instance, in this culture, the medicine is that we are too in our heads, that we rely too much on intellectual knowledge and language and terminology, and we're not enough in our bodies to say, oh, this feels icky, right? So I want to start off by showing you a little bit about who I am in terms of systemic oppression. So I have here my marginalized identities. I'm a Black woman, and woman has the Y. In case you don't know, it's to be more inclusive of all women, right? We know that women are not just those who are assigned girl at birth. We can talk more about that. If you have questions, seriously, questions are really going to be helpful to help me know who's in the space and what you would benefit from knowing. So I'm a Black woman. I am genderqueer. My pronouns are they, them. I'm polyamorous. I'm pansexual. I'm spiritual. And I am from a poor working class of origin. My privileged identities, right? Because we tend to think, oh, BIPOC are over here and they're marginalized, and then white people are over here and they're privileged. But it's more complex than that, right? So my privileged identities, my first language is English. I am able-bodied. I'm cis-passing. So even though I'm genderqueer, I can still get away with appearing to be just a female. If I don't want to correct people on my pronouns, if I don't want to, be targeted as a non-cis person, then I can get away with that. So that is actually a privilege. My class right now, even as a poet, I am upper class, which is pretty dope. I'm just gonna say I earned that one. But my nation of origin, and of course, these are all identities that are specific to the context of the United States of America, right? So my nation of origin being the United States is maybe not as much of a privilege in France, for instance, right? So speaking in the context of the United States of America, I have citizenship in the United States of America. That's a privilege. My religion of origin is Christianity, which is also a privilege. So if this doesn't make sense to you, please ask questions. I'm also going to be breaking these down. This is a lot of information. We're not going to get to all of this in an hour, but I want to put it up here. And the reason I want to put it up here is because we live in a society that is very, very much binary, and colonization and colonial thinking likes to put things into categories. This again goes along with this logic thing. It's like, okay, if things are in categories, black, white, right, wrong, victim, perpetrator, then it's simple. I don't have to worry about the nuance. I don't have to sit here and say, okay, how can we defund the police and have a community that is dealing with violence? As long as we say victim, perpetrator, then we have this nice binary that says, okay, if you're a victim, that means you've never done harm. You have never worn a low-cut blouse or had sex, you are pure in every way, right? And if you're a perpetrator, you can't be likable, you can't have done anything nice for anybody, right? We force our judicial system, and that is, whether you want to look at it as our judicial system creates this binary in all of our minds and all of our conditioning, or if you want to look at it as the judicial system is a subset of our ideology, which we'll talk about later. Either way you look at it, we have this binary. And this binary is incredibly harmful, because what happens when I say either you're a victim or a perpetrator? Well, a victim then can't have done anything wrong. And if that comes out in court, then, case solved. They were the problem. The perpetrator, and this one is even more insidious, because we have a judicial system that says if you perpetrate harm, if you are found guilty for something, you are removed from the community, you go away. And not only do you go away, you're not worthy of love, you're not worthy of community, you're not worthy to be a part of this community, but when you get out, you carry that for the rest of your life. That is now who you are. Can't get a job without saying it, can't fill out a census without saying it, right? And so what happens then when I, Assétou Xango, have harmed someone, and I go to think, oh, I think that might have been abusive. Oh, I can't think that, because then I'm not worthy of love or community, right? And this same thing is happening when we talk about race. White people are shutting down because there's no space for the human. Black people are shutting down because we're not able to say, oh, I'm also a part, I'm also conditioned in this society. I also carry racist tendency. I also carry toxic misogyny, all of these things, right? So I'm here for the nuance. And I know that might make it more complex, but I think that is where we're going in this society, in this conversation. We're going to the more complex versions of it. So I believe I have a question. Let's see. Carolyn Love asked, does women have the same meaning as women with a Y? Absolutely, it does. And I prefer the Y because of the chromosomes, just because Y is usually associated with male. So I like bringing that into the female to express that inclusivity. But yes, those are the same meanings. Those are for the same purpose. So this brings us to the conversation around intersectionality. So real briefly, I always love to say her name, Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw coined this term, intersectionality. Black woman, really activist, really active in the 60s. What's going on in the 60s? Well, we have the Black rights movement and we have the women's rights movement. And what Kimberly experiences, like, well, here I am, this Black life, trying to get my rights. But here's the Black rights movement that is highly ran, or has the appearance of being ran. We all know that Black femmes were running that whole thing, but has the appearance of being ran by Black men, right? And we don't like to talk about it, especially not in mixed spaces. And there was a lot of harm being done to Black women in those spaces. So Kimberly says, okay, I'll go over to the women's rights movement, because obviously, as a woman, as a female presenting person, I am targeted by sexism. And then what's happening in the women's rights movement? Well, all women are the same. We don't look at Black and Indigenous issues. We don't look at people of color issues. We're only focused. We have to stay focused. We have to go forward and be a community together, which of course leaves out racism. So Kimberly coined this term, intersectionality. And you can read this definition. This is a framework that she used to say, hey, I am both Black and I'm woman. I am impacted by racism and I'm impacted by sexism. And those two things in this one body cannot be pulled apart, right? So that again is this nuance that we're talking about. And that is where my identities come into play, right? That I am both marginalized and I'm privileged. And I have to navigate those every single day. And we tend to think a lot about our privileges. We tend to think a lot about our marginalizations, especially if we're BIPOC, especially in the socio-political climate. And we don't tend to think much about, okay, how am I navigating my privileges? And I appreciate Boulder Library and all of the white folks who are here to deal with your privilege. And I also want you to keep an eye on your marginalizations, right? And this is where that nuance and that complexity comes in. But it is imperative that we bring in everything, or else we're not really going to get to where we want to be in these conversations. So Leanne asked, is there equivalent of women for girls? That is such a great question. I don't know, but all of these words are made up. So I don't see why you can't just throw a Y in girls and tell people what it means. I'm pretty sure that would catch on. So Leanne, go for it. I think you should coin that term. But if there is a term, I don't know about it. Okay, so here is our identity wheel. So these are, so you saw me note all of my identities in each of these. So these are where systemic oppression lies. So we have ability, we have age, and age is an interesting one because the privileged age, we say it's whatever age you can be president. I think it's 45, something like that. So we usually say that age is the most privileged. However, there's obviously ageism that targets older people. There is, there's obviously representation that is this, kind of 20s, early 30s. So age is an interesting one. It's kind of fluid. But then here, education, the higher education you get, the more privileged you are. Ethnicity is going to be of European descent. Gender is going to be cisgender. Cisgender meaning you identify as the same gender you were assigned at birth. Race, white. Religion, Christianity. Sexuality, heterosexual. Okay. So again, this is a ton of information, so please ask questions. So I want to break down how oppression works. And so all of these are systems of oppression that exist in our current society. And so each of them has the same tools. Obviously, they function a bit differently, but each of them have the same tools in how they function. And this is, okay, get out your pen and paper, please take notes. This is where I found out about the 4 eyes of oppression, and I was like, oh my goodness, systemic oppression might be surmountable. Because I don't know if any of y'all feel like this is overwhelming. I don't know what to do with this information. The 4 eyes of oppression helped me be like, oh my gosh, I can actually see how this functions, and we might be able to change things. So here are the 4 eyes of oppression. We have ideology, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. So ideology is culture. Ideology is our ideas, our stories. So I'm going to use the example of slavery. So in slavery, the ideology was Black people are inferior. God has put Black people on this earth to serve white people, to serve the less inferior, or serve the more superior races, right? So everything that we're doing to these Black bodies is 100% okay. They're less than human. They're meant to serve us. We can do whatever they want. They're cattle, right? On the institutional level, the institution was slavery. The institution was also slave catchers, now known as police. What's up, Celine? Oh, you're here. I don't know why you're here. Okay. Okay, so, but I love that you're nodding. That lets me know. Okay, so institution, slavery, slave catchers that are now known as police officers. I don't know if, I don't know if in your circle you're talking about the fact that police officers originated as slave catchers, but I think that's a valuable part of the conversation, right? That is why we can be sure that the police officer, that the institution of policing is not a few bad apples. This is systemic. this is from the origin of the police force, is racist, right? We have to have that conversation. And fortunately for me, I was in a Denver Police Department training where they trained all of their onboarding police officers as well as some of their veteran police to say, this is happening. It was ran by a Black man, and he was like, this is cultural biases, and we need to talk about it. And they actually talked about the origin of the police force. So these conversations are possible. And then we go to the interpersonal level. So the interpersonal is person to person. So we have the slave catcher who's catching the slave. We have the slave who is telling the other slaves to stay subordinate, who is teaching Christianic views that say, you know, turn the other cheek. We have the slave master to slave. We have all of these interactions that are, again, emboldened by the ideology. The institutions say, absolutely, you can do this. Let us fund it. And then the interpersonal says, I'm superior to you. Or on an interpersonal level, you know, interracially, we're saying we have to stay safe. We have to stay within this, right? And that's where the internalized come in. So the internalization, everyone has internalized these systems, y'all. I hear people say like all white people are racist. True. What is truer to say is everybody who was conditioned in the system is racist. I am racist. I have to contend with my internalized racism. How that shows up in my body is going to be different than in a white body or in a lighter skinned body, right? But I still have to contend with it. So internalize, you are likely going to internalize yourself as inferior or superior depending on where you land on those binaries, right? So I hope that's helpful. So now it's really the conversation. I'm going to be the bigger window now, but just leave these identities up. So Emily, if you can switch me to being big, sweet. Okay, so this is the part where I say, ask me anything. So these, oh, cool. So we have one. Can you speak to how the legal system is interwoven into the four eyes of oppression? Absolutely. So the legal system is an institution, emboldened by the ideology, again, this victim perpetrator binary. And of course, I'm only touching on like a sliver of how these things work. And I believe that you can kind of see, once you have that information, how these things operate. But yeah, so the legal system is an institution emboldened by the ideology. We still have, interwoven from slavery, interwoven from genocide, interwoven to the very nature of how this country was built, we still carry these very racist ideologies, and our institution, and racist as well as sexist, as well as heterosexist, as well as cis-sexist, you know, the list goes on and on, ableist, forever. But we still have these ideologies that feed into the system of the legal system. So then we find that Black and Indigenous and people of color are being charged with higher sentencing, are being found guilty more often. And so the legal system, it's all interesting, right? Because it's all of the four eyes are interwoven. We kind of separate it out to get a clearer view of like, okay, how is it working at this level? How is it working at this level? But of course, because the legal system is employing people, the judge or the jurors are looking at this person of color carrying the ideology that is reinforced by the institution and saying, oh, definitely guilty. We don't think it's because their skin is darker than ours that they're guilty, but those internalized biases are already present and continually reinforced by the other eyes, right? By our internalized understanding and our internalized conditioning. So I hope that answers your question. And Carolyn, if you want to expound upon that, or if you have comments about that, I would love to hear your perspective as well. So what is this saying? It's a systemic aspect of policing. Okay, Al, maybe say more about policing. Do you want to tackle defunding the police? Okay, so I guess this question is more specifically from Penny, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Penny. Are you asking me specifically about policing and how I feel about defunding the police? And if you are, I'm down. Okay, so I'll tell you what it is for me. I have studied, not extensively, by no means an expert, but I have studied transformative justice and, to an extent, restorative justice, in the ways that they are similar. But transformative justice is different than restorative justice. So restorative justice is often funded by and created within already existing institutions. Now, from what I've already said, we can kind of see how that might be problematic, in that these institutions are already carrying ideologies that are racist. So restorative justice, in Colorado, which is one of the leading states for implementing restorative justice into schools, and I think Boulder is actually maybe one of the leading cities in the state. Great idea, right? Instead of penalizing our students, we are going to have a circle of their peers come around and like, we're going to bring in the community to hold folks accountable when harm is done. It's a great idea. Unfortunately, because the system, because the institutions, and because the people have already internalized racism, what we found out in the years after this was implemented is that the disparity gap between how students of color were treated was still rather large, right? The white kids benefited from it, and the kids of color either stayed at the same rate of expulsion and suspension, or that number went up. So because we're within an institution that is already racist, I have a hard time imagining how we're going to be able to dismantle that from within. So for me, defunding the police is absolutely necessary because of the origins of the police force, because of what is already internalized, what is already done. That is going to be imperative. And so transformative justice is more community-based. It is created by Black femmes, by Black women, by Black and Indigenous people. This is being taken from the models from restorative practices, and transformative justice are being taken from Indigenous practices from throughout the world. And transformative justice is what I enjoy the most. And this is mostly being done here in the United States, in the Bay Area, by Black femmes, Black women, and Indigenous folks. And what that looks like is, instead of saying, here's a victim, here's a perpetrator, and here's a judge and juror, which is kind of the same idea here, but taking it out of the context of that institution and saying, okay, so here is a person who caused harm. The language there is important, right? Instead of labeling someone a perpetrator, labeling someone a violator, we say, here's a person who caused harm. That happened. Perhaps they caused harm repeatedly. That's it. That's additional information, right? Here's a person who received the harm. Here's the person who was harmed by it. And then here is the community who is also impacted by this event. And so what that does is, you have a circle of, and you need a circle, right? You need a circle of people who are presiding over these discussions over how to deal with the harm, because they can also harm, because we understand that all humans are capable of harm, and all humans are capable of receiving harm, and all humans are capable of good. And you have the conversation that says, how do we repair the harm? How do we transform the harm? Because we can't go back. We can't go back to the way things was. The relationship can't be back to the way that it was. But how do we repair this enough that we can move forward, that no one is disposable, that we are being sure that both the person who received harm and authored the harm is getting the help and the healing that they need? Because we know that it's not just the person who received the harm that is going to need healing. In order to harm, you have to have been harmed, and that must be unintegrated. And so this is happening throughout the country. There's a chapter of this Transformative Justice Collective here in Colorado that is queer queer-led and only works with queer people. There is a huge and strong chapter of this in the Bay Area, and they actually work specifically with cases of pedophilia. So they're saying, we're not going to call the cops because we know that the cops harm our community. We are going to handle this ourselves. I don't know how they do it. I'm not as familiar with their workings, but I know that they work specifically on that. So there are already systems that are being worked, and they're by no means perfect. This is beta testing. This is really micro level. But there are opportunities for the community to be more involved in policing ourselves and keeping ourselves safe. And those conversations are happening throughout the country. So I definitely believe in defunding the police and pouring more money into systems like that, into our education systems. And again, we get into the institutions and how they're conditioned and can they be reformed. But yeah, stuff like that is really where I believe in putting our money. So what other questions do we have? So Penny says, if you feel appropriate for this discussion, could you talk more about the direct line between slave patrol and current policing? I mean, to me, it's pretty clear that the line between slave patrols and current policing, I have a line in one of my, well, the thing is, again, it's this conditioned institution that is conditioned and originates in racism. So slave patrolling, you saw a Black person running or without their master, and you arrest them or you shot them, right? And then after that, and again, this is sort of interesting, right? This terribly handled transition from we have slaves to freedom, where we're not undoing the harm. We're not addressing the harm. Now, all of a sudden, Black people are able to be free, but white people are still conditioned to believe that they are superior and that they are supposed to own Black people. So there is a deep anger. There's a deep anger when you see a Black person just walking freely, right? And I believe that this is in our institution of policing. Now, I am not a police officer. I have spent probably one day in a police office. Okay, I'm gonna have to take off my headphones, so this might get a little echoey.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I spent one day in an office, police officer, listening to them do this cultural bias training. Essentially, how I understand it is there was no transition. There was no addressing of the internalized racism in the police force. The idea of, like, we see this in all systems throughout, because there is a condition of superiority, because there is a condition of Black people and people of color are criminals, are harmful, are violent, right? Because of the ideologies that come all the way back from slavery and to the very, and we should probably talk about this, race in origin, the very definition, the very creation of race is for power of people of European descent, specifically Aryan people, right? Blue-eyed, blonde-haired people, but that we've expanded that a bit in modern time. But the very creation of race is for the purpose of power. So when we have officers being trained in this way of whether it's subconscious or it's overt, I think there's a lot of both going on, where you're trained to say, first of all, there's no trauma-informed care, right? There's no way, and we also, because we don't talk about how police force we're killing Black and brown people, absolutely. We're also killing people who have different levels of ability, who appear to, Elijah McClain appeared to be different than most, which is why he was mishandled, right? People with different levels of ability who may not be able to immediately respond to an officer's, demand are killed at higher rates. Trans people are killed at higher rates, right? So it's all of the systems of oppression. But when an officer is not only not informed on trauma, and is also informed that in a split second you can die if you don't pull out your gun, if you don't discharge your weapon, you might die. And also, by the way, all of these people I just listed are more dangerous. That these crime rates that have to do with poverty and have to do with all of these other things are not. It's just an innate part of people of color, right? And how those are skewed because also the media is institutionalized and conditioned in these things. So it goes around and around. So yeah, that's kind of a vague answer because I'm not specific with policing, but I know that all of these institutions are conditioned in racism. Okay, so I need to move through these a little bit faster. And to Kathy or Emily or anybody, just let me know when I should be wrapping up. Okay, so my experience is that people who identify as women want to be involved in these types of discussions more than men. If you see the same, what's going on here? Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, so Jerry is saying that women tend to show up more for conversations about race. Yeah, that's sort of interesting. So my partner, who's also genderqueer, is more of a biologist of I can't remember the actual name of it, but they lean more towards like our gender biology actually does matter, even though they identify as binary, they still recognize. So in that case, I think that they might say that, you know, women are more nurturing. I don't know if I agree with that. I think there's some conditioning present that women are conditioned to be more nurturing. Either way you kind of go, I think that there is there's more room, there's more expectation, there is more desire for women to be involved in addressing harm, in recognizing people's humanity and being a part of that conversation. And yes, I also have noticed that. And I've noticed that when men are involved in these conversations, there tends to be a lot more action-based. And again, whether you believe in the nurture versus nature thing, you might think that might be because of biology, or that might be because of conditioning. I think it's probably both. I think it's always both. I like to hold the tension of the dichotomies. So that's my answer to that. What are my thoughts about abolishing prisons? Okay, so and when we talk about so I am a self-proclaimed abolitionist. If you didn't get that already. So when we talk about abolishing the police force, when we talk about abolishing prisons, we don't mean now or even 5 years from now. This is all going to be building blocks. We need to get these systems in place. We need to beta test them on micro levels. We need to build them out. We need to begin to shift the ideology of a culture, because if we continue, and I've seen it happen in transformative justice circles, obviously we're seeing it happen with restorative practices, that if we just throw in, okay, now it's community-based, but again, we're not addressing the conditioning, we start to find the same systems are being replicated. I've seen it happen in transformative justice, where even though we say no one is disposable, no one is, completely wrong and irredeemable, we're still treating people in this victim perpetrator mentality. And so the Transformative Justice Collective here in Denver, which I've been a part of, is we're constantly studying, constantly unlearning our own biases, noticing when they arise, noticing when our own triggers and our own experiences arise, right? All of that plays into it. So yes, I believe in abolishing prisons, because I do not believe that anyone is disposable. I do not believe that there should be a place that someone goes away for life. And I know that's scary, so feel into your toes there. I know that the idea is that but there's harmful people roaming the streets, and I get that. And I think, again, like, these are nuanced, these are deeper, longer conversations. But ideally, I would love to live in a world where no one was disposable. Everyone was able to repair their harm and redeem themselves and come back a stronger person. But that is going to take a lot of cultural unlearning and changing. So, yes. Okay. I don't agree that there's a systemic racism in police departments. Fair. Yesterday, when questioned by members of Congress, what are your thoughts about this statement? I don't agree with that statement. So I think, here's the thing. Okay, so this is where the dichotomy really, really gets us. When we hear racist, for instance, this is a really good one. So when I talk to white folks, you know, more in a more conversational setting, and we're talking about racism, we're talking about dismantling racism, and I say, hey, guess what? We're all racist, right? Feel into your toes. Gets a little uncomfortable because of the dichotomy. Is like, oh, you're either racist, bad, or you're not racist, good. When in reality, we're all showing up on some spectrum of racist all the time. You can be sure. If you're ever called out for being racist or something along those lines, I encourage you to listen, because it's probably true to some degree. And maybe it's blown out of proportion, but you can't know until you really sit with it. And so that is why it's important for us to be able to say, okay, this is a spectrum. I'm probably always on it. How am I being racist? What ways am I being racist? And so for me, it's never going to be true that a system that is in our current society is not racist or sexist or ableist. This is the water in which we are swimming, right? This is the air we breathe. There is no way for it not to be. And because of the origins of the police force specifically, and, you know, let's just fast forward, because I can't even say the names of all of the Black and brown people who have been slain this month without taking a gigantic breath, because those are disproportionate, and not in numbers, but because of the percentage, the amount of Black and brown people and the amount of white people, and then the percentage of the Black and brown people, people of color, who have been murdered or mistreated by the system, and the percentage of white people that have been murdered or mistreated by the system, I can say it's definitely racist, right? Just based off of pure statistics, I can say that it's racist. So I understand this Congress, and I don't know who William Barr is, but I can understand why they might be like, no, it's not, because that's an uncomfortable thing. That's an uncomfortable thing to admit. And again, it's like saying, I have abused someone, because that takes me straight to jail, that takes me straight to everything I'll lose. It makes it really uncomfortable. So I imagine that this person is struggling with that. But yes, I definitely believe that the police force is racist, as I believe most institutions in the United States is racist. And until we are able to have a difficult conversation about that, things are unlikely to change. Shelby Bates asks, what is the name of the organization that you mentioned doing that in work in Colorado? So yes, and I will throw out a couple of names. So Transformative Justice Collective is a queer-based organization. They are, they're queer ran, and they work specifically with queer folks. I don't know during the pandemic what they're doing, but they are, yeah, they're in Denver. I also want to name Building Bridges. So Building Bridges is a white, it's kind of a white, people of color, it's white owned, but this is an organization that is doing really powerful work in terms of anti-oppression. So they do incredible trainings for white folks, and they do incredible like healing circles for people of color. They are, yeah, that is just an incredible organization. Are there any ones off the top of my head? I think those are all the organizations that yes, that's it, Celine. So yeah, those are two organizations off the top of my head that are very helpful. Okay, great. And Transformative Justice Collective was shared in the Facebook link. So if you are looking for that, it's in the chat. Yeah. Wait, Transformative. Okay, Denver Transformative Justice Collective Facebook link is in the chat. Cool. Wonderful. Okay, so that's you guys gotta keep asking questions, or else I'm not gonna have anything to say. Maybe I'll do another poem. That would be cool. Cool. So I'm just kind of looking at the comments here to see what y'all have been chatting about. Yeah, so feel free to ask more questions. Yeah, okay, so let's do a poem. And again, Boulder Library, feel free to cut me off. So this poem, I'll just do it and then we'll talk about it. How about that? So, and Emily, you can take down this screen too. They call me Eve. I was never given a last name, but this was only the first case of identity theft. Look, I know what you heard about me. That I was carved out of the ribcage of a man only as an afterthought, and they told you I'd look differently, but make no mistake. They have burned down my libraries and tried their best to scorch my memory, but I remember well the sweetness of God's breath on the back of my neck when she whispered me into existence. She told me I would be the first of this new species she was experimenting with. There was no talk of dominion. But she did teach me a certain harmony with Lady Gaia and told me to embody her beauty, so I walked tall. Wide hips and extra weight to nourish the children I would carry, and as they grew, I taught them. Taught the young, the small, the weak, taught them plenty. They came to my crown and asked me how to run their nations. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates sucked from the supple breast of my knowledge. Little did I know, when I turned my back, they'd whip slave ships into it and create this spot that blames me for the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. But there was no stink that tempted me to leave the promised land. I'm pretty sure those were your guns, chains, and aggression. So was it fruit or the middle passage that closed Eden's gates? This spot that tells me childbirth is a curse and I am the cause. Well, I am sorry. Sorry that I broke my back to carry your children. If you ever dared to ask me, I'd call you the curse. I've been called temptress, but it was you who stripped me naked, called me bitch, and made me hit my knees until I knew what forbidden fruit really tasted like. And the abuse didn't stop after Lincoln. It was just heavily disguised as the media, tossing me a pair of booty shorts and telling me to sway my hips to the liberal lynch ancestors because it reminds racists of a better time. They never look me in the eye, because they want me to forget that I have them, so that I can ignore the Planned Parenthoods that hunt around my Black neighborhoods with advertisements, making them as appealing as easy bake ovens to tout Hitler. I have been waiting for the UN to step in and label it genocide, but I am only met with government officials planting cocaine into my son's body until he is addicted, in jail, or dead. I know why they do. They see her image in me, and they fear my power. They sold me as commodity so that I would forget what I was worth. But you should have smashed my mirrors first. Did you think I couldn't see? I am the beauty of gold embodied. Black skin as beautiful as the galaxies they stole from my libraries, but not from my eyes. You can keep your idealistic paintings of me, but you will never bleach my skin or straighten my hair, forbid the native drums of my tongue, but you never quiet the lavish language of my dance. I want to move my kinks, my fight, my fire. Save your cat calls for those deserving, because I do not play with rats. You will call me goddess, or you will not address me at all. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so Ellen asks, can I talk about redlining housing and how they further racism? Yes. So redlining, for those who might not know, is this very tangible and also intangible ways in which Black people were quarantined, which is an interesting word to use in 2020. But we're quarantined to Black neighborhoods. were, and this, and I'm not sure when this became like a tangible, like we are drawing this line, but Black people were not allowed to get housing outside of those areas, right? And we can see where those areas are to this day, right? We can see where that happened. And we can also see them being gentrified. So those areas had less value. The value of the houses were less. The quality of the houses were less. Policing was heavy. Support was low. Education systems were ill-funded. And if you tried to go outside of it, you would not be able to get housing. If you were a Black person, right? You would not be able to get that loan. You would not be able to get that house. There were, again, institutionalized, interpersonal, internalized. If you were a Black person and you knew this was going on, you probably didn't even try, right? And this feeds into white flight, where Black folks would move in and all of the white people would move out. So we see this reflected in both the housing systems of today, where those, you can kind of see where those red lines were, because those housing systems are still broken down and or being gentrified. So that is where, especially in Denver and in Colorado, with the legalization of marijuana and everyone and all of these folks moving here, particularly white folks, we see people being evicted, people being threatened, 5 Points is being gentrified, Parker is being gentrified. All of these traditionally Black folks, where Black folks gathered because they had nowhere else to go, are now being gentrified. And the displacement and the trauma of that displacement, because also the thing that we don't talk about is that 7 generations back lives in our body, in our DNA. Transgenerational trauma is a scientific certifiable thing. It was also an indigenous knowledge long before science was a thing. But now, you know, for our reference point, we can see this is actually verifiable by the systems that we prefer. So absolutely, that furthered racism, or was a product of racism, and furthered disparity, furthered the space where, okay, now the police in this area seem to be more violent somehow, right? So absolutely, yeah. And the thing is, so the 4 eyes of oppression is really helpful because you can use it, you can apply it to anything, and you can see how these systems are racist, sexist, ableist, classist, anywhere you want to go. And so I encourage you to use that tool as you're viewing the media, as your kids are going to school and what they're learning, and really breaking down, okay, yeah, no, I see how that might be racist, I see how that might be sexist, etc. So yes. Oh, and I'm also, I kind of blazed through that poem and then we forgot about it, but I encourage you, and Eve, I did that as a TEDx speech, TEDx Mile High speech a couple of years back. That's on YouTube. And so if you really want to apply these terms after we hop off, I encourage you to watch that video and listen for the 4 eyes of oppression. I talk a lot about institutions. I talk a lot about interpersonal. So really apply this as soon and as quickly as possible, because I've just found it to be the most useful tool in all of anti-oppression work. So Sophie asks, the 13th, yes, the documentary, I believe it's still on Netflix. I encourage you to watch it. For anyone looking for more about the direct line between slave catchers and modern policing, sweet, thank you. Thank you so much, Sophie, for that. I watched that documentary a long time ago, but yes, please look that up. And also, if you're looking for the line between the judicial system and racism, I encourage you to read, oh, now I'm completely blanking on the name. Somebody help me. Michelle Alexander. The new Jim Crow. So that takes a critical analytical view of our jail system and how it is replicating the systems of slavery. So I encourage you to do that. Oh, you love my face paint. Thanks. Appreciate it. And this, you know, I don't really talk about this very often. This is very much a practice of honoring my own divinity and my ancestry and the orishas of my ancestry. And it just kind of started happening very naturally. But that's what that is. That's just me kind of altering my face. And by altering, I mean like the altar, like the holy spiritual version of that word. So thanks, Emily, appreciate it. How can we purchase your poetry? Oh, do I have a book available? Okay, y'all are being sweet. So as of right now, I don't have a book available. I am actually submitting my book this week. I'm submitting my book. So the hope is 2021 or 2022, I will have a book out named Belonging. And it's talking about all of the ways in which, again, having intersectional identities, all of the ways in which I have searched for belonging on this planet. And specifically in heritage. So I find that I'm too Black to be considered American or treated as a white American would be. And I am also too American to blend in on the continent. I went to Mali in 2014. I didn't speak the same way. I didn't eat the same way. I didn't wipe my ass the same way. I felt very, very other. So the sense of lack of belonging is something that has been a very difficult experience in my life. So this book takes you through that, it takes you through the race version, it takes you through just like the normal human desire for connection and relationship. It takes you through my loss of my father, or just not having a father and not having that connection to masculine. And then also it takes you into the God and into how I found my divinity and how I found the wholeness within myself. So that book is coming out. I say all of that to say, please follow me on Facebook, Assétou Xango, right here at the bottom. Okay, and on Instagram, Assétou Xango, AssétouXango.com. Please, sign up for my newsletter. When that book comes out, I'm going to be putting it on blast. So as of right now, there's not a way to purchase my poetry, but you can enjoy my poetry through YouTube, and I've been published on different sites throughout, the interwebs. So you can just search my name and kind of whet your appetite until then. And I also do Word Wednesdays. Every Wednesday on my Instagram, I come on and I do some poems and I talk to some folks and I interact. So yes, please, for the time being, just make sure that you're on my newsletter or you're following me. And then when that book is out, I will definitely let you know. Okay. Love the line, "You should have trashed my mirrors first," the way you recited. Thanks, Leanne. Yeah. When you learn your own divinity, there is something you can't be touched. You can't be touched anymore. Okay, and do I have any recommendations for media that celebrates Blackness and Black joy? Well, that's all I watch. So I recommend that if you're the type of person who likes to be on Instagram or Facebook, follow folks. Lady Speech Sankofa is a leader in this community. So Sankofa is Sankofa. Lady Speech is one word. Lady Speech Sankofa. Bianca McCon. McCon is MIKAHN. So these are local folks that I follow. Jamila Woods is a national poet. Mahogany Brown. I mean, honestly, like I could sit here and list for decades. What I encourage you to do is just to pay attention, to set the intention that, you know what, I'm going to listen for more Blackness. I'm going to listen for more Black joy. And then it'll start showing up on your feed. It'll start showing up in your advertisement. Books, obviously. So you want to talk about race? Good read. Freshwater by Oweke Emezi. So Oweke Emezi is, I hope I spelled this name right because it's in my head. AKWAEKI. Emezi is EMEZI. So Freshwater by Oweke Emezi, and they have a series of books out. I've only read Freshwater, and it is literally on my altar because it's that good. And I've heard, so for me, as a Black person, it was incredibly validating. Like, it was the first time that I felt my existence was language, like fully language. When I talk to white people who have read it, their response is it was incredibly disorienting. And the way that the white person who actually recommended it to me, the way that she languaged it was, the reason it was so disorienting is because whiteness was not only decentralized, right? And when we talk about decentralization, we know that whiteness is the water we're swimming in. Not only was it moved, it wasn't in the book. And you can't imagine a space, of however many pages, 300, 200 pages, where whiteness doesn't even exist. And I don't just mean white people, I mean the culture of whiteness doesn't exist. And the language is specifically, so this is a Nigerian author. And so the language is specifically Igbo and Ifa. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, I'm here, I'm understood, I'm seen, I'm felt. And white people are just like, wow, this is disorienting. So that one I highly recommend if you really want to challenge yourself. But yes, just set the intention to have more Blackness, more Black joy. And I love that you use the word Black joy, Emily, because that's a big part of this for me. I know that, and so for all my BIPOC people out here, I know that we're in the middle of a revolution. We have been for some time, but it seems like maybe it's revving up and we might actually take this all the way. And I know that there's a seriousness to that. And I know white folks are feeling that too. There's a seriousness to the realities of the way that people of color are treated on this continent, in this world. There's huge, deafening, seriousness to that. And also, in order for Black lives to matter, Indigenous lives to matter, Asian American lives to matter, et cetera, in order for our lives to matter, they have to matter while we're alive. They have to start mattering when we're here. And they have to start mattering more than just our accessibility and our funding and our class. They have to start mattering to us. We have to find our joy in the midst of all of this sorrow and all of this difficulty. We have to find the ways in which this life is worth living. Because if our lives matter, then our joy and our self-care and our connection must also matter, right? We can't just be fighting for our lives to matter in, we get a stimulus check and we can afford to live. It must matter in a way that fills us up, that makes this life not just surviving, but thriving. And I want to pay homage to all of the ancestors and all of the generations that came before me to even get us to a place where we can think about that. I don't think when my mother sees me with this hair and this makeup and saying the words polyamorous and pansexual and genderqueer as a Black person, the first time my mom started doing those things, terrified. Because in her day and age, the only thing you could do was stay out of the way, stay in the status quo. Don't be too much or you get shot, right? And here I am, this activist, this outspoken person. I have a large platform where I speak these things. And I'm a lot safer than my mother's generation was. And she was a lot safer than the generation before her. So I know that these conversations can be disheartening and feel like there's not much we can do. But I also want you to recognize that this is a long race. And the evolution in this country, though it feels like we take 2 steps back and 2 steps back and 3 steps forward, we're moving forward. And the people who came before me are a huge part of that. So I want to leave that there. I don't know any references for 4 Eyes of Oppression. I'm a very tangible person. I don't do a lot of theoretical stuff. But yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. I thank you all so much for engaging and listening. I thank you, Boulder Library and Boulder Foundation, for having me on and really centering voices of color. You're doing it right. And Celine's gonna hop on and we're gonna talk about what's coming up next.
Yay! Thank you so much, Assétou. I was like snapping and nodding and celebrating that whole time. So thank you. That was just amazing. And again, for our viewers, please follow them on Instagram, Facebook, whatever social media you have. So thank you again, Assétou. We're so excited. So glad to have you here. And I just want to say on behalf of David Farnan, Patrice Meduray, the Boulder Public Library, and the Boulder Library Foundation, thank you so much to Assétou for sharing all of their amazing words and thoughts and experiences with us this evening, and for launching One Book, One Boulder. The book that we are reading is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. Copies are available for checking out at any Boulder Public Library, so please check those out. And I'd also like to give a personal shout out to my team on the Boulder Public Library for helping with tonight's event. So huge thank you to Emily, Kathy, and Zach for helping out tonight. You all are amazing. And for everyone else, please visit boulderlibrary.org/one-book for more resources and for more One Book, One Boulder events. Recorded events will be available on the library's YouTube channel, and select events will include Spanish translations as well. Thank you again for your participation in One Book, One Boulder. Please join us for the next event, which will be a book discussion of So You Want to Talk About Race with Congressman Joe Neguse and Stefan Breckett from the Flowbots. That will take place on August 17th at 6:30 p.m. And for more information, visit our calendar at calendar.boulderlibrary.org or boulderlibrary.org/one-book. Thank you all so much and have a great evening. We look forward to seeing you soon.